Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Following the horrific events of January 6th, which brought bloodshed, mayhem, and dishonor to the temple of American democracy, we are so delighted to have back with us our good friend, Representative Grace Meng, for a special conversation about the resilience of democratic values and the crucial importance of the peaceful transfer of power. Moderating today's discussion will be Julie Raymond, AJC Deputy Director for Policy and Diplomatic Affairs. As a reminder to our viewers, AJC is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization, and as such, AJC does not endorse or oppose political parties or candidates for elected office. With that, Julie, I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Daniel. At the start, I just want to say that this was meant to be a bipartisan conversation, but unfortunately, Congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey had to cancel last minute with his regrets. And we hope to be able to have him on soon. Nonetheless, if we could pick one person to share her story of what happened last week and to give us insight into what lies ahead, there's probably no one better than Congresswoman Grace Meng. Congresswoman, first, on behalf of all your friends at AJC, we're so glad you're safe. We know what your experience was like last week. We hope you'll tell us a little bit more about it. But we're so glad that you are secure and that you're with us today. Today of all days, thank you for carving out some time to speak with us. If you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about last week, and if you could share some of your experience, I think that would be helpful and enlightening for everyone.
Sure. Well, first, I want to say thank you to Julie and the entire AJC family for inviting me here today, but also for putting together these Zooms, over the last few months. I guess it's been 9 months, 10 months at this point. A lot of people obviously are quarantined at home, and the importance of us being able to convene even on a virtual setting is just so important and so therapeutic for so many of us. So I'm thankful to be with you all and to continue our work together safely. Last Wednesday, as you know, was historic in a bad way. I had expected large crowds to begin with. I came to the Capitol extra early that day to avoid the crowds and just to, be extra safe. I thought I was being smart, and I went to work in a room that was off the floor of the House, and decided not to go to my office, which was obviously more identifiable in case there were any troublemakers. And so I was in this room from about 9 in the morning. And then around 1:30 or 2, we started getting alerts campus-wide that one of the House office buildings, and for those of you who've been to Washington know that there are 3 main office buildings. Cannon was one of them, and it was announced that they were evacuating Cannon. I thought this was really strange because we weren't supposed to have anyone in those offices that day. It was only open to members and to our staff, unlike usual times. And because of the coronavirus, it was also closed off. So I thought it was really strange. And then within minutes, I got another alert that said to stay away from windows and doors. And then that there was a lockdown, that no one was able to go in or go out of the buildings. This really made me nervous because, this is not like anything we were told earlier that day or week. Within about, I don't even know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I started hearing a lot of commotion outside of the room where I was at. I heard a lot of stomping and chanting, and, I don't know what it was or who it was, but it was just very loud. So I got really nervous. One of my colleagues, Lois Franco from Florida, was actually luckily had just come into this room with me, so I wasn't alone. And we decided to, and then what we did was probably not too smart. We had the TV on, and then we realized that these people were right outside our room, which scared us even more. And so we turned off the lights, we put our cell phones and the TV on mute. We moved whatever furniture we could to sort of barricade the door in case they tried to come in. And luckily they never even tried to come in. But we didn't know that at the time, and it was really nerve-wracking. The Capitol Police were just completely overwhelmed. So we knew that even if someone were to breach the door, that likely no one would be able to come get us. And they actually weren't able to come get us until 5 hours later. We were really, after hour 2 or 3, it became a lot more quiet. So we weren't as nervous, but the first 2 hours were really nerve-wracking. But luckily I was in good company, and nothing happened, obviously. There's just a lot to digest and a lot to take a look at, because the situation that happened that day around the whole Capitol really could have been a lot worse.
And I'm imagining you, 2 Democratic women, an Asian American and a Jew, camped out together. I am sure that everyone was rattled by this experience, but did you have a sense at that moment that, if they found you, this could be particularly bad for you? Like, was there that sort of understanding of the role of identity? And like, could you even have those thoughts, or was it just too frightening and overwhelming?
No, I definitely did. And Julie, I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think in some odd way at the moment, I was less afraid about them breaking down the door than how they would react at finding 2 minority women, essentially. I had someone text me saying, just throw on a Trump scarf and walk around, and, I said, we can't. We totally stand out. We stand out, and we don't know how people will react when they see Lois and I based on how we look, or if they guess that Lois was Jewish. We just really didn't know, and that's why our goal really was just not to be found. We just turned off all the lights. Yeah,
Thank goodness you weren't. In the Jewish community, we've talked a lot about sort of the anti-Semitism that was on display in T-shirts and banners, the 6 million weren't enough, the Camp Auschwitz, all of that. Knowing that there's so much that needs to be tackled and unpacked from what happened, is there a congressional response? Is there something that the nation should be doing about specifically the hate that was on display?
So, I say this pretty often, but never often enough, which is that I really appreciate and support wholeheartedly the work that AJC does, because AJC is an organization that doesn't just stand up for the rights of our Jewish community across the country and across the globe, but does such important and groundbreaking work in bridging different communities and strengthening those relationships. Because in times like these, we see why that's important, and why it's important to call out hate regardless of who the target and who the victims are. I obviously was inside and didn't see a lot of the images until way after, but to see what you mentioned, Camp Auschwitz sweatshirts, Confederate flags in our Capitol, in the People's House, the personal accounts from Capitol police officers who were called the N-word over and over again as they were protecting us. We cannot ignore it. We have to condemn it, and we have to do it in unison. It doesn't matter what party you are or what you look like or where you come from. our kids, my kids are tweens in middle school, and they even recognize these images and recognize how wrong they are. And they don't know necessarily that you have to call them out and what Congress should do, but they know it's wrong and it feels unjust in their hearts. And education is so important. I feel like in this country, the greatest country in the world, we need to do a better job at providing a more complete and balanced history to our children. I'm really proud of the work that was done to get bills like, I think last year's Never Again Education Act, from the Holocaust to the history of Black Americans to Asian Americans. Our kids, including myself, don't learn enough about the diverse history of our country and what people went through to build America into what it is today. So I think we have real opportunity here, and we have legislation on all of that in Congress. And so I hope that we can pass legislation and continue to work together with organizations like AJC to strengthen those relationships. And I know that Representative Chris Smith isn't here with us today. We're in the Capitol, there's lots going on. Our schedule changes every second, but I will say that he is an example of someone that we've worked with to fight for religious freedom. When I first got to Congress, I think one of the first bills that I sponsored was to allow houses of worship who were hurt from Superstorm Sandy to be able to get help from FEMA, to get grants that were going to so many other nonprofit organizations. And we were able to, it took us a few years, but Chris Smith was one of the members who, on the other side of the aisle, who did a lot to help us shepherd that bill. And now it is law, as we've seen through the coronavirus legislation. So that is just one way of how our communities can come together, to work together, to strengthen each other.
Thank you so much for that. And it's a weird time in America. It's a weird time for an organization like AJC, frankly, that is always trying to build bipartisanship and bring people together. And it's hard now because there's understandably a lot of anger and misunderstanding on both sides. And so I'd love to ask you, how do you, knowing AJC, knowing how we try to build bridges, how can we at this moment, when there's so many people saying we're not going to talk to those on the other side, they've gone too far in whatever it is, what can we do to help sort of restore that cohesion, that unity? And is there hope for that? Like, are there people who still echo your tone of the need to be reaching across the aisle?
Yeah, it's really hard, and I've said since day one that this place is a lot more bipartisan than people realize. I know it's not popular for the media to write about stories when we are getting along and the every single day occurrences of us working together. I passed legislation when we, as Democrats, were in the minority and when we were in the majority. And that is because we were able to, as with many of my colleagues, to be able to work with both Republicans and Democrats. It's really hard to break through these days because of the increase of use in social media. Obviously, certain stories get more attention. The loudest voices may get more attention, and the loudest voices aren't necessarily the most representative.
Or even the most truthful, right?
Right. And so I will say, so yesterday, and I will try to be as nonpartisan as possible. Yesterday, because of all that happened, we got metal detectors installed outside of our House chamber. There were a few Republicans who, for example, refused to utilize them and walked right past them and were not very friendly towards the Capitol Police, who, for the most part, have not had a day off since Wednesday. There was one new Republican member, a freshman, Representative Meyer, who I actually haven't even met yet. But he today went up to the Capitol Police and said, I'm sorry for the way some of my colleagues behaved. that is not representative of all of us. And you have someone, I think her name, I haven't met her yet either, also a freshman, Representative Mace from South Carolina, who has really spoke in a very neutral and responsible tone and in a very difficult way for her via her party in the last week. So it's important for us, I think, and so hard, but it's important for us to highlight voices like that who might not get as much attention. It's human nature to want to hear the most exciting and dramatic, but we have to find ways to amplify the words and the work of members who are working together, because that literally happens every single day here in Congress.
I love those examples, and I love the idea of being able to sort of segment out the voices within a party and not just casting an entire party in one light. There's been a lot of talk about the Republican Party specifically and how they're going to respond in the post-Trump reality. But it seems to me, as an outsider, so disagree, tell me if I'm wrong, but the Democrats are also struggling sort of with how to balance this accountability with unity. And even President-elect Biden said that he fears impeachment will both set back the cause of unity, but then, of course, also maybe stall his legislative efforts, confirmations and whatnot. Of course, today you're talking about impeachment. That's the issue on the table. How do you strike that balance between unity and accountability?
It's true. I mean, our country does need unity. It does need healing. But just like with any sort of illness, cancer, for example, you have to be able to locate and extract the bad parts, the tumors, before you can have real healing. And whether we're talking about January 6th vote, where many members voted to overturn the electoral results of the American people, you have members like Chris Smith who did not. And so it's important for us to highlight their actions and how there are still so many examples of us working together. And this is a really tough week to talk about that. So, you know, I will probably not sound very convincing or convinced today, but I do think that there is a path forward before we decide to move on. And of course, we can continue to work on legislation and policies at the same time. We can multitask. We need to find out what happened on January 6th. This is as simple as when you are disciplining a child even. You have to find out what went wrong and you have to hold people accountable. And whether that's people on the inside or whether that's people on the outside, we need to know where there are gaps, because you can't have a functional and safe democracy with these weaknesses or gaps in our system. And so we are, you know, obviously there will be efforts to hold people accountable, but if we don't have that basic trust and credibility from members who are working together, it's going to be even harder for us to move on. And even with today's vote, you know, I try hard not to talk about it in a political way at all. We have Republicans who are supporting this impeachment vote who did not support it at all the first time around. People view these as crimes that happened in the United States Capitol. The Capitol is literally a crime scene right now. And so it's important that we address what happened, work to prevent it from ever happening again, and of course, work with the sense of unity and healing and continuing to bring back resources for our constituents. But there's just a lot of feelings of hurt and betrayal on all ends over the last few days. And so, you know, still a lot of work to do, but of course the objective is to move forward productively in unity.
Of course. Thinking about what happened on the 6th and almost building on your analogy of the tumor that needs to be rooted out, there have been a lot of questions raised about how the Capitol Police were prepared for and how they responded to what happened. We've seen heroes like Eugene Goodman, the Black officer who diverted the mob away from the Senate chamber, but also images of Capitol Police officers posing for selfie with the mobs, and stories of people who may have actually sort of helped and facilitated this insurrection. What happened? What do you think needs to change? And now, do you feel safe? Will you feel safe next week?
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make us feel safe and whole again. I think this is a building that it's not just Congress members, right? If you take all the people who were and work in the building, Congress members are actually the minority number wise. There are staff, there are really young staff. There are cafeteria workers, there are custodial workers and other workers, employees throughout the whole complex. There are staff members, probably a majority of them, who were not in the building that day, but who watched and heard their friends and their colleagues go through it. This is all trauma. It all has to be addressed. No one, I think if someone told you they felt completely safe right now, they would be lying. We are working, our speaker, Nancy Pelosi, is working really hard to make sure that we have more safeguards, you know, from the metal detectors to the National Guard, who are literally camped out all throughout the property today. They slept on the cold floor last night with lights on and everything. They have no place to shower or anything like that. But so there is a lot that's going on. There's fencing. For those of you who've been here, there's a black wire fence that has gone up all around the Capitol complex, and I'm sure there will be more. And so there's a lot being done to make sure that people do feel and are safer. But we still need to know what happened. We only know what happened through personal stories and short clips of videos that we saw on social media. That's not a full investigation, and we still need to know what goes on. I know that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office are being really, I think, proactive in seeking people. They've questioned and arrested people all throughout the country, including my home state of New York. And so I really want to say, you know, let them do their job, let them investigate. There are stories now. Representative Mikey Sherrill from New Jersey said that she saw some members giving tours, which was odd because we weren't allowed to give tours on the day before January 6th. And so it's really hard
I think
not
she
to
called them like
jump to.
reconnaissance tours.
Yeah. I mean, she has a lot more credibility to use that word than I do. But, you know, I really think we need to figure out more info. I mean, to investigate very aggressively and proactively, but let's wait for a little more info to come back.
So I want to ask you one more question, maybe more than one, but definitely one. We keep talking about social media, right? We know what happened, the little that we know on the 6th, because generally because of social media. We know that social media has allowed for hate and conspiracy theories to be mainstreamed to a degree that's dangerous. There's a lot of questions now because of the president being removed from Facebook and Twitter and Amazon booting Parler. Where is the line from your perspective about dealing with hate, dealing with incitement, and allowing our First Amendment, our freedom of speech to continue?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. And we can't view the events of January 6th and said, well, had we shut down all you know, avenues of free speech, we would have been okay. And those 5 people wouldn't have been killed and nothing would have happened, because I'm not certain that that was the faux answer and solution either. We need to make sure that we aren't just censoring people because they don't agree with us or because they're saying something that is personally and politically offensive to us. But this week was a unique circumstance. I think part of what we're trying to find out is not just to censor the free speech, but that to ensure that it was monitored properly and adequately. Obviously, we have free speech in this country, and especially for those of you who went to law school, the whole, scenario, case study of yelling fire in a movie theater, and the concept of incitement is not okay. And so I think for us, you are, and I might not be popular for saying this, you're never going to be able to shut down every medium where rhetoric and plans like this might be occurring. But it's important that law enforcement monitors it so we have the proper response, because that didn't happen Wednesday. Even the stuff that was on social media or wherever, I believe, and I'm not an expert, but I believe that there was enough threat and plans out there to have had a stronger response and coordinated response from law enforcement. And we're still waiting to, get more results and answers from the investigating authorities. But, we do have to be careful.
Before I let you go, and I know that today is a day unlike most, so especially mindful of your time, what advice would you give to us as an organization that wants to be bipartisan, that wants to bring people together, but also has been very clear about what happened last week as an act of sedition? And AJC has said those who committed crimes must be held accountable, as must those who encouraged them or hope to benefit from them. What advice would you give us? And really, how can we help you and your colleagues as you seek to move forward?
So two of my favorite things that AJC does that I love and that I think is constructive is, well, one of them you can't do now, but when you've hosted events across cultures and across religions in the past, one of the first events I went to as a freshman here was celebrating Hanukkah at the Indian consulate, right? That might have been one of the first times we met. And I met and got to know some of my own Republican colleagues through that event. Members that I didn't know before. I know I've never told you this. Members that I didn't know before, and members that I might not have ever said hi to in the hallways if I saw them. And that's important, not just for members, but for our communities to know each other and to work together. You can't work together if you don't know each other and if you don't appreciate each other's differences and similarities, right? And I always talk about my district in Queens. I represent Main Street, Queens, where on one side is a heavily Asian population and on the other side is a heavy Orthodox Jewish population, right? A mile or two apart, they probably never interact. And that's not okay in the long run, right? Like, we work so closely together, and it's going to be hard to overcome differences and to work together if we are not even aware of each other. The second thing, what I really appreciate about AJC is, I sort of mentioned it before, about not only standing up and calling out anti-Semitism, but in making sure that you call out hatred and discrimination when it affects other communities as well. When Asians were being discriminated against in the early days of the coronavirus, AJC was literally one of the first groups across the nation to come out and say, that's not okay. And it might have seemed easy for you all and in your DNA, but for a marginalized community like the Asian American community, we're not always seen as minorities. We're not always included. And it just meant a lot and helped a lot that a large group like AJC stood with us. And so that is something, for example, that I talk about when I'm with my Asian American community leaders, so that they know it wasn't just our community upset, but that other communities were working with us and working for us to combat discrimination. And that's the sort of understanding that we all need to have, whether it's on the Hill or whether it's, across cultures and communities across the country, because, everyone's busy. Everyone, can barely handle what's in your own universe and in your own circle. And it's hard to recognize and to appreciate when people outside of your immediate comfort zone are working on your behalf too. And so you and I, we operate in a bunch of different worlds at the same time. So it's really our responsibility to try to help them realize this and to appreciate it. And, easier said than done, but I think those two things are very important.
Thank you for that. It feels like an understatement to say that there's a lot of work ahead of us. But I want to tell you, and I want all of our viewers to know that we are excited and here for the next step in our partnership with you, to heal our nation, to combat hatred, to address all of these problems that unfortunately seem to be growing. But that I feel a little bit, I don't know, a little bit of that burden lifted, knowing that that we have you with us, and that we can call on you, and that you're there fighting the good fight for all of us in the U.S. Congress. So thank you for your service. Thank you for being there. We're so glad you're safe.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you and to be with everyone, and be safe and healthy as well to all of you.
Daniel, do you have words to close this out?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman, so much for joining us today, especially during such a busy day. Julie, thank you. And I would also like to thank our audience for joining us today. And if you enjoyed this program, please consider making a donation to AJC at ajc.org/donate. Thank you again, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thanks.